Now it can jump pretty high. It knows it can jump high. It's a miniature, so you can't really tell her miniature. Well, because it started out this way, now it's this way. Hopefully it will grow. They say it's not, the vet says, my wife, the vet says, in a few years, the full growth. And now, I think it's only 6 or so.
Really? Even still. Go after it.
Sometimes she acts pretty calm. She's only 50% twice in the middle of the night. That's a great time. Now she's not understanding She's got a house. She's got a house. A couch is just there on static display. Only she tells me I have my chair. She has her chair. And she's going to try to bring her. She was going to bring the dog one time and stay here. But she backed out of it. But the dog would probably sit there around and go to sleep.
Oh, you know you're assisting on the table.
So she's going to try.
You got closing fire. What if they put you on double duty today?
Doesn't hardly work. It's only figured out how to work. Other times it's hard. Other times she can't walk in directly on the park. Usually it's yeah. Not too bad. Not too bad.
Thank you, Ron.
I was looking for money.
Well, no, came to the wrong corner.
Takes her longer to get the situation. Yes, he's there. Right. I don't know where she's at. Anywhere he's not. No. Not so good in here right now. You forgot we traded places. You used to be always cold, now I'm always cold. Yes, no. I took that blanket off a long time like yesterday. Oh, this is a new chair. It's not broken yet.
It is good to have everybody here for worship. I'd like to ask you to open your Bibles to the book of Esther, chapter 9. And we're going to, in a moment, ask Brother Mark Hill to lead us in a word of prayer. Esther chapter 9, and we are getting close to finishing the book of Esther, so we'll probably get close to the end today and finish it up next week. Because Esther has been such a book about the providence of God. Of course, it's the book in the Bible that God's name, it's the only book in the Bible God's name is not mentioned, but you see God on every page. A very, very, very fascinating book. We'll spend maybe a class or half of a class talking about God's providence and how we should view it and look for it today. I think that'd be fitting to finish our study of Esther. Let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. It's good to have everybody here. Appreciate everybody joining us from home. And we're going to ask Brother Mark to lead us in prayer.
Father Almighty, we come before you now. We give you praise and thanks. We ask you to be with us this morning as we open your word and study from it, that you guide us in your truth, that we take the wisdom that we learn and apply to our lives. We ask you to continue to guide us in that truth, that we use our abilities to further spread your word in this world. And we ask you, Lord, at this time to be with Luther as he recalls the things he has studied, and to be with us as listeners. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. So the book, of course, very well written by the writer of the book, starts to bring us to a conclusion. We are in Esther chapter 9, and we're going to pick up around verse 18. Esther chapter 9, verse 18. Let me get us caught up on our overheads. Of course, this is a book about courage and faith. That is Esther stepping up on faith, and also lessons about the providence of God. Our key passage has been Esther chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, especially verse 14, where Mordecai said to Esther, "Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time like this." I know we keep putting this up each week. You always need to think about being at the right place at the right time. And you never know that whenever you always are determined and decide to do good and to say good, you never know who you may influence in your life. You may influence somebody that you don't know that you influence, but they needed you at the right place at the right time with the right heart, with the right spiritual mindedness to say the right thing or to do the right thing. You probably have those moments in your life where somebody was at the right place at the right time and said something or did something that encouraged you, and it was unintentional, but it encouraged you, and maybe God used them in that way. And so it's a wonderful faith question that Mordecai asked Esther that we still need to ask ourselves today. Chapter 9, we titled this Esther's Feast of Purim. Purim actually was just celebrated earlier this month by Jewish people. There's actually, I don't think it's a cookbook. It's a book how to celebrate Jewish spring feast and Purim, and that's a book you could buy today. So we're talking about events that happened, 2,400 years ago, and still, because of what happens in Esther chapter 9, it is still celebrated over 2,000 years later. Moving forward, we saw that Haman, who's the one who was the enemy of the Jews in this book, he had set up on the first month of the year that on the 12th month that they were going to kill the Jews. He is discovered within 3 months. That plot has been uncovered, and now we move fast forward 9 months to the month of Adar. Adar is the Jewish December on the calendar, and that was the month that Haman, who's now been put to death, had set up by law that all the Jews in the Persian Empire were to be killed. We see that there are now 2 decrees that have been given. Esther has gone to the king, and the king is working very closely with Esther, because the law of the Medes and the Persians was of such that once the king made a law, it could not be taken back. It could not be canceled. So the king gave another law, and the first law that Haman tricked the king into signing was that on a certain day, was that the 13th day of the 12th month? Is that what it was? that all the Jews were to be killed, and if you kill the Jew, you can take everything in their house. You get everything they have. You can plunder them. Time to get rich. And so the second decree was, while we can't take away the first decree, the Jews have a right to defend themselves, so you better think twice before you want to annihilate your Jewish neighbor. And so the Jews defend themselves. They were triumphant. And we asked the question why they were triumphant. We see that Haman's sons are executed in this chapter. These are things we've already studied. And we ended last week with the question, it says twice, I believe in chapter 9, that the Jews did not plunder their enemies. That was the custom of the day. You, Persian Empire, you go over here and take over your neighbor empire. Well, you plunder, and you take a bunch of good stuff back home. Whenever Jerusalem was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, he plundered the city. He took the things of the temple and took them back to his country. And here, all those in the Persian Empire were told by law, you can plunder your Jewish neighbor after you kill them. But now the Jews can defend themselves. The Jews did that. The Jews killed many people who tried to kill them. And they were triumphant. They won this mini-fight battle because of these two decrees. But the Jews did not take the other people's stuff. Why did the Jews not do that? I think somebody had their hand up.
I got a quick question. It just occurred to me. This decree that Haman handed out, essentially a decree that they could kill the Jews, not that they had to kill the Jews, correct? It wasn't you have to do this and go out and annihilate.
If you go back and read what Haman said to the king, it was to kill the Jews.
It was just a permission to do it, not.
No, it was I believe a command.
It was a command. Okay,
because he set up the Jews in the mind of the king that these are an enemy of the empire. Why did Pharaoh, when the Jews lived in Egypt all that time, why did Pharaoh enslave the Jews?
Because they were getting too big and he was afraid of them conquering him.
An uprising. Well, that's the picture that Haman, more or less, pictured to the king. Plus he said, if you do it, I'm going to put $10 million in your treasury. It was just like a double win for the king. And the king thought, well, we got an enemy of the people in my great empire. Then go ahead, Haman, let's write the law and I'll seal it. So it was a command to do that. The second command is that the Jews have the right by law to defend themselves, and many of the people didn't decide to mess with the Jews. So in our previous chart in chapter 8, do you remember what many of the Persians did because of the Jews? Well, let me back up a minute.
They converted.
They converted. When Haman put out the law to annihilate all the Jews in the kingdom in 12 months, how did the people in Shushan and throughout the empire take that? Were they happy or disturbed?
Disturbed.
They were disturbed. Yeah, it was very disturbing. So this has been a very unrestful, period of time that has taken place. Now, from the time of Haman's decree to the time that the new decree comes out, it's only 90 days. And of course, the book of Esther covers 9 years. Really, it covers 10 years. And so, while we covered 9 years of history, the last 2 chapters have been, or 3 chapters, have been a fast 90 days. And the Jews defend themselves. They did not plunder their enemies. Now we see the king and the queen work together in verse 12. And let me see here. If we covered this, we'll go ahead and read this. Verse 12. And notice how the king is working with Queen Esther, who he now knows is of a Jewish lineage. But hey, it's his wife, it's his queen. And he's working with his queen. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan and the citadel and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. What's the mindset of King Ahasuerus at this point? What's he thinking? What's he doing?
He's gonna do whatever to please Esther.
Yes.
He's in love with her.
Yeah, he's in love with her. Plus, he was duped by Haman, and here he wrote something in the law 90 days ago because of the wickedness of Haman. So he's working with Esther, and I want you to see the eagerness is not strong enough of the word. The diligence, the due diligence that he is giving for Esther. And look at her request in verse 13. Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day. It was the 13th day that the first law said, kill all the Jews. It was the 13th day. The second law said the Jews get to defend themselves. And now Esther's asked for another day for the Jews to be able to fight, and the king gave it to them. Again on the 14th day of the month of Adar, that would be our December, and killed 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces, what was that? 127 provinces from India to Africa to even part of the area of Macedonia. The king's empire was vast. The remainder of the Jews of the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies. So it's there's time of war, time for peace, and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day of the month, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So we see that King Ahasuerus works with Queen Esther. The Jews are given a second day to defeat their enemies and to defend themselves. And then we come to that, they're having a feast. So at this point, any comments or questions up to verse 17?
Luther, I would just say that the decree that Mordecai wrote, it accorded them the right to plunder. And I think they just didn't do it.
Yes, they didn't do it.
They didn't do it. And my belief or opinion would be that they had not been under oppression, or
Yes.
they had not been. It was really a preemptive strike in which they killed 75,000 people,
Yes.
and so that sent a message, I think.
Yeah, it did.
They just did not exercise the right.
Yes. So, excellent point. Bring that home. How would you bring that home? I'm trying to think of an illustration in our country. We'll just use Jews. Let's say that what happened here, I hope this isn't politically sensitive or anything, it's illustrations, all it is the vice president of the Persian Empire. Think about the vice president of the United States tricked the president and said in December, on the 13th day, we're going to let every American kill every Jew in the country. Just saying that as an illustration in a Bible class, do you feel how disturbing that feels? Can you imagine how this empire felt? This empire was rocked and disturbed. The Jews here got their jobs, got their homes, their kids are going to school. In Esther's day, they have their homes, they got their jobs, they got their businesses, their kids are going to school, they're going to synagogue, their lives are going normal, like everybody over here is going normal. And this evil man, Haman, all because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him, got this wicked law put into order. Think about how disturbing that would be in our country. And then it's found out, and so we put out another law saying, hey, if you mess with your Jewish neighbor, they got a right to defend themselves. And some people mess with our Jewish neighbors, and our Jewish neighbors defend themselves, but they didn't take their stuff. Why didn't they take their stuff?
I like what John said about that. That's, one behavior is predatory, and
Yes,
the other is not.
it's not.
I like that statement. That says a lot. If you, that gave, the Jews honor.
It did. It did. I like that. That's a good word to use.
I want to point something out. In previous, before time, when God give instruction, He say, "Go to this place, kill their women, their kids, their men, their animal, and do not take anything from them because these people are contaminated." So it was kind of in the tradition.
It was in the tradition, and it was the practice of the day. I remember in teaching about the life of David, when David was on the run, David plundered cities. I had trouble wrapping my mind around that, but that was the way. And you're right, that was the way. And that was the way here, and these people in the empire, if they were greedy, they're thinking, you know, I got a pretty wealthy Jewish neighbor over here, you know, I'm going to take over him and his jewelry store and everything. You know, the law says I can do it, you know. Well, now another law comes out and says, well, you know, we got one law that says you can do it, but we got another law that says that Jew can protect himself. So you better think twice. If that happened in this country, wouldn't everybody just want their life to go back to normal? And I like how Dan said, or somebody had said the word predatory. The Jews, like today, would just want their life to be normal in the country, get things back to normal. They wanted things back to normal. Plus, they worship a different God than the people in this Persian Empire. And you know, if you know, they were being good neighbors. They were loving their neighbors out of themselves, and they wanted their life to get back to normal. The best word to come up with is the word Paul came with, is that word. They acted honorable. They simply defended themselves if somebody tried to mess with them. They were not out to start a war like Haman did.
But it shows you how. Oh,
No, go ahead.
okay. What it
Ladies
shows you
first.
was under Vice President Haman, right?
Yeah.
The people followed his ways in a
Right.
way, you know. So then you have Mordecai. He's already shown who his character was.
Yes.
So he's the vice president. So you're not going to go against what you've already, against what he's put out, his character.
Right.
So you're going to, you know, you hang out with the Romans, you do what the Romans do type of mentality.
Right.
So I feel like also that played a part because of his character.
It did. And what's interesting, this book ends on the character of Mordecai, which I find fascinating. Really, this book ends on what God did behind Mordecai. The last chapter is about Mordecai. It's only, what, 2 or 3 verses? But you're right. Very good. Excellent point. So Mordecai is now vice president, and he is noble, and he's Jewish. And that probably just stopped a lot of that first decree. I'm not going to mess with my Jewish neighbor because my vice president now is Jewish, and the queen's Jewish. So, you know, that, what was that? How many died throughout the empire? 75,000. Well, you had 75,000 greedy people. You got an empire of probably over 1 million people, and only that many people tried to mess with a Jewish neighbor.
I got a point and a question. The first is, you were talking about the people were disturbed in Shushan and other provinces because of Haman's decree. And then the Jews defending themselves and doing nothing more than defending, no plunder, no capturing or anything else. That shows that at the time there was some sense of humanity.
Yes, there was.
And because, you know, it's, God gave us that humanity, that to care for our fellow man or to show respect and dignity to him.
Yes.
Now my other question is, what is the significance of them hanging Haman's 10 sons?
We're not told. What
don't
I
know.
see is that Haman's 10 sons would have rose up to continue the plotting of the father. To me, I don't know, but I think in other Bible examples you'd have like where, why did God say destroy all the Canaanites, even down to the
Right.
children and the cattle and everything? What you find even today is we are drawn to our ancestry, and we want to know where we came from and our lineage and our family, and we are drawn to that. You look at somebody that might be adopted, they get to be a certain age, they want to know who their adopted parents were. I'm just putting conjecture out there. But, if God just simply had them, when they took over the land of Canaan, just kill the adults. Well, you got the teenagers, and you got the kids, and they're all going to grow up, and they're going to know what the children of Israel did when they took their land. And it's most likely what would they do? What happened when they didn't clear everybody in the land? It was a thorn in Israel's side. But God's decree for that situation was to punish wicked nations. In this, I don't know, but I would think it would be to totally squash and destroy any future uprising against the Jews.
Well, see, we're making an assumption here.
It is an assumption.
That Haman's sons would seek revenge against the
Yes.
Jews and Mordecai.
Yes.
And that's why I was asking, because it's like, you know as well as I do, with the Bible you can't make assumptions, and that's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. Sometimes you got to say, we don't know,
Yeah.
and then leave it at that. Leave it at that.
I think educated assumption would be the things that you wish for somebody else
Right.
fall back on you, because he wanted annihilation
Yes.
of the Jews, so his bloodline got annihilated.
Yes. Yes. And that's what happened. There's a bloodline, and it was annihilated. Joe?
I was just reading back whenever we were talking about the 10 sons of Haman, in verse 10 it already says that they had killed the 10 sons of Haman, did it not?
I think it's verse 10 just reporting what's going to happen as if it had already happened. So.
And wasn't Haman a descendant of the Agagites, where they was already supposed to be
Exactly.
wiped out?
Exactly. They were supposed to be punished and wiped out
Yeah.
already by Saul.
Mm-hmm.
So very good observation. You are a good class on your toes. Okay, so I thought I was going to get farther. We have, we're doing good. We're doing good. We're doing good class. So let's go through the Feast of Purim. And there are 3 stages to the Feast of Purim. I see just kind of naturally developing before it became an official holiday. What were the Jews doing in the 12th month on the 13th day and on the 14th day? Well, on the 14th day in verse 17. Because all this civil unrest has now been brought to an end. The Jews were triumphant, so what are they doing?
Feast and celebration.
Feasting, yeah. What's that iconic picture? To give you all a history test. Some of you younger people may not pass this history test. What's the iconic picture? I think it was in New York of an American sailor, and World War II had ended. What's that iconic picture? You remember it? He just grabbed a nurse and put her in a dip and gave her a kiss. You know, they didn't know each other. And they brought them back years later, I think, when they were older in life. It'll be in your history book. It's an iconic picture. The end of any type of threat and war is going to be a time to celebrate. And the Jews have had this stress for 12 months. It's now brought to an end. Let's begin reading in verse 18 about the Feast of Purim. But the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th, as well on the 14th day. And on the 15th day of the month, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So notice how just by natural habit, because the war's over on the 15th day, or this, the civil unrest, it says that they had set this up on the 15th day. They did this on the 15th day. They set that for it to be a day to celebrate. Verse 19, therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. So, 12 months ago, everything was doom and gloom. Now everything is good, and we're very blessed by God. And they call it a holiday in verse 19. Notice, what does it say about the cities in verse 19? What cities? Cities that had walls or did not have walls?
Unwalled.
It's interesting it says that. We mentioned that this book probably took place before the book of Nehemiah. What would have been an unwalled city?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem was still an unwalled city. Jerusalem was on the hit list of Haman. And we don't hear about Jerusalem in this book. It's not talked about in this book. Nehemiah hasn't gone back there to rebuild the walls yet. But it would have been an unwalled city. And those Jews would have been on the list to be destroyed. And they're back there trying to rebuild the temple and things and trying to go back to their homeland. Verse 20, and Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted of the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, I think that's the second or third time he's called the enemy of the Jews in this book, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and they cast pure, that's either pronounced pure, like the water filter, or poor, that the lot, that simply means casting a lot to make a decision, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on their own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged in the gallows. So they called these days Purim, after the name pure, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them. The Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants, and to all should join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year, according to the written instructions, according to the prescribed time, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. And these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among the descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Esther and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Why half a chapter about Purim? Why so much emphasis by the writer about the days of Purim?
To
Couple
explain
reasons.
its origins, actually.
Okay, so it's already being practiced, and now it's explaining for the Jews that are going to be practicing it and their descendants and descendants, for Jews even today practicing it, where it came from.
Can I make an observation on
Yes.
that, though? God had already established a bunch of days of feasting and everything else.
Yes.
And this is just an observation. As we start going farther and farther coming up in time, we have the Pharisees and the Sadducees making the same type of decrees. To me, this is almost where man is starting to step on God's toes.
Well, there's a difference. This was set up as a Jewish holiday. This was not saying God has said
I
to
get
do
that.
this. What the Pharisees and Sadducees did, they took the law of God and twisted it and bound it on people. So this would be different. I think it would be different. I see what your point
But
is.
what I'm seeing though is, now as we come farther in time, they could start demanding, you have to do this. Where this was not a decree by God,
Yeah,
it was a decree by man, but now you're forcing it upon the people.
Right. To say that this was of the law of Moses would have been wrong if the Jews bound it, if the Pharisees bound it. To simply do it as a holiday, we have decree holidays.
Yes.
Thanksgiving floated around for a while before the president finally made Thanksgiving a certain day of a certain month. So we got the holiday now. Well, now they have their official holiday, and it was, we have marked on our calendar, Pearl Harbor Day. We have other things marked of significance for this country in our calendar. And for them, they set this up as a holiday, but we're going to see how it naturally grew before it became certified. Now, several hands have gone up. I had another hand over here, I think.
Yeah, I was going to use that as it would be like a country making a national holiday. There's nothing wrong with that. But what happens down the road is that Purim and Hanukkah, which is another festival that was not ordained by God, become more important because they turn into a gift giving occasion and fun, which there's nothing wrong with that. But then the holidays that have been established by God in law then maybe get forgotten.
Yeah.
So the only problem is the outlook of the people. There's nothing wrong with people deciding that they're going to set a
Okay.
time aside.
Yeah, and that's what happened. I mean, this was the end of a potential war, and they have set this aside to celebrate. Ray.
I think verse 30 there sort of explains what's really going on here between the Jews and the Medes and the Persians. They lived in peace, but Haman
Yes.
stirred up the people that caused hatred. It says that they only killed those who hated them.
Yes.
They didn't kill all the Medes and Persians. They didn't attack them all.
No.
They probably lived in peace with their neighbors and
They did.
everything. So this is what it's really about. The Jews just want to live in peace with the Medes and Persians.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think likewise, the king saw that too, because he allowed
Oh, yes.
Mordecai to send this letter out.
You're exactly right. You're right, and that needs to be emphasized. Haman meant ill and war. The Jews just wanted to live in peace and continued to live in peace.
That's why they didn't plunder.
Yeah, that's why they didn't plunder, and they defended themselves. They didn't go out and kill their Persian neighbor just to kill their Persian neighbor, like Haman's law said. And Haman's law also said the Jews were an enemy of the state and all this, and all that was wrong. But excellent point on the mindset of the Jews. Dan?
I think there's an irony. Haman cast.
There is.
He cast Pur to instigate the destruction of the Jews, and at the end of the story is that they've got a feast called Purim
Yeah.
because of that. There was a providential turnaround.
Yes.
And this is a big deal. It's the biggest deal because 22 says they turned from sorrow into gladness,
Yes,
and they went from mourning to a holiday.
yes,
And it's supposed to be forever, this feast. Verse 28, remembered and celebrated every generation, every family, every province, every city, and these days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews.
yes.
So that's a big deal, isn't it?
It is. And that goes back to answering the question I asked, and you're exactly right. Why half a chapter on this? One, it's a big event. It's a national holiday now for the Jews. But who turned the evil Haman back in his little corner 12 months ago, casting lots? What day are we going to kill all the Jews? Hey, fell on the 12th month, 13th day. That's the day we're going to do it. Who turned that around? It was God. God turned that around. What did Joseph say to his brothers? What you meant is evil, God meant for good. What is this whole book about? It's not really about Esther and just Mordecai. It's about the providence of God taking care of his people that God was going to use to bring Jesus into the world and fulfill his plan of salvation for mankind that God planned before time began, and some little dimwit, somebody who had little man syndrome, thought he was big stuff, was not going to stand in the way of God's plan. And the fact that you have the Feast of Purim that goes back to what Haman did is, as Dan said, a great ironic turning of events. I want to just notice real quickly the stages. Go ahead.
Real quick, you're talking, like you said, this whole book is about the book of the providence of God.
Yes.
All right. So that way God can get his son into the world like it was in his plan. On the opposite side of that, I think this was Satan
Oh, yes.
trying to stop it.
Yes. All throughout Bible history, you can see where Satan tried to destroy God's plan for saving man through Jesus Christ. And even at the cross, Satan failed. And he still fails today. So the Feast of Purim started as the Jews just celebrating on their own, which, hey, we would have done that if the great war we were in came to an end. Mordecai approves it as a holiday. I believe sends out a letter to do that. But it's Esther that certifies it. I think it says with a second letter, and calls it the days of Purim. So think about, it's time to bring our class to an end, and we'll go into chapter 10, which is only 3 verses next. Read chapter 10, it'll probably take you 30 seconds. It's a short chapter. I want you to think about, to close our class out, Esther sitting at her Esther desk as queen, and her signing off on certifying the days of Purim. And 12 months earlier, all her people were under a death sentence. And her uncle said, perhaps you have been called to the kingdom for such a time like this. Because she had faith in God, and God's working behind the scenes, she sits here at her Esther queen desk, and she certifies the days of Purim, and she turns around what Mordecai did in casting pure lots to kill the Jews. She is now having a celebration of the Jews throughout the empire and throughout the history of the Jews that they still celebrate today. And if you want to write it down before I change the chart, there's your cookbook on Purim if you want to order it. They still celebrate it today. It's amazing to me the providence of God and how this feast. They do celebrate this by giving of gifts and by cooking of meals today. And I think they even dress up for this feast today. I had some notes about Purim, but we're out of time. I'm not going to go over what they do today with it. You get the last comment.
Well, it's a quick question, and you might want to put it off till next week. But in verse 32, where it says, and it was the decree Esther confirmed in these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. What book is that specifically?
I don't know, unless it was the book of the Chronicles of the Persian Empire. We're not told.
Yeah, because that's mentioned down below, but it didn't.
Yeah, yeah, it, you know, being a decree, I would think that's a legal matter, and that would have been a legal book. So, we're gonna close there, take a break for our Bible, our worship service. You've been a great class, thank you.
I don't know if you changed your format,
Huh?
but this was the only thing that popped up on the Facebook page, but you can still hear you talking in the background, whereas it used to be, you would see you.
Okay, I'll go check it. What is a button? I forgot to push. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Gold is good, fine
Well,
gold.
I always, after we start, I always
For
check.
some reason, now, it's refined gold.
But anyway,
In other words,
you said 10 o'clock.
fine gold is fine gold, but when Jesus comes into it, in the New Testament, and he's refining us. Because fine gold is good, but it wasn't fine gold, wasn't good. It was really, had to be refined, had to be done twice.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure.
What I'm saying is,
The context of what
what I'm
was it?
saying, we're in Esther, right? Esther's in the Old